This chapter was all about the player game object and the allies. We started by creating the player game object, which was the boy model. We added to the player the boy animator controller, and then the components it needed for physical interaction, namely the rigid body and the capsule collider. From there, we added the Game Manager game object and applied to it the Game Manager script and the mouse location script. If you'll recall, the Game Manager script handles all of the important details that have to do with managing the entirety of the game: when it starts, when it ends, what the player's score is, enemies, and so on. The mouse location script is responsible for knowing the location of the mouse in the 3D environment at all times so that other game objects can reference it. From there, we added new input axes by going to Edit, Project Settings, Input. The two input axes we added were Switch Attack and Summon Ally. We then added to the player game object all of the scripts we would need for interactivity. We added the player input PC script, which handles reading input from the keyboard and the mouse and passing it on to the other scripts. We added the player movement script, which handles moving and turning the player around in our scene. We added the player attack script, which doesn't really do anything yet since we haven't created our attacks. Finally, we added the player health script, which manages all of the health properties, when the player is alive, and communication with the game manager. Once we finished with that, we set the camera up by positioning it above the player and then applying to it the camera follow script. The camera follow script gets its target from the game manager and smoothly follows the player around the scene. We finished the chapter up by adding our allies, the sheep ally and the dog ally. We saw that the steps to create one were easily applied to create the other. And in the end, we have two allies that are ready to be summoned when the player is ready with its attacks. In the next chapter, we're going to create and add our enemies to the game. The enemies will then be able to attack the player, and the player will be able to lose the game. After that, we'll have no choice but to add attacks to the player so that the player can defend themselves.